Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by No Foods. No grain, no gluten, no guilt.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, author KJ Howe is back with another book in her Thea Paris thriller series. This is an action-adventure set of books where the main character, a hostage negotiator, rescuer, and seriously tough person, also happens to live with type 1.
Just because you have an illness, it does not define you, it is not who you are, and you're capable of great, incredible things, really. And that's what I wanted to blend it so that it's part of her in the sense that it's her essence, but it doesn't, dissuade her from tackling her dream, which is to save hostages.
We find out why Howe decided to focus on diabetes for this series, how she got George R.R. Martin for her annual Thriller Fest, and some tips for writing. Plus, in our Know Better segment, a push to hear more stories from women of color with diabetes. And in our Community Connection, Christine Fallabel got my attention with a column she wrote about not wanting to be anybody's diabetes hero.
If anyone had a choice to take a shot 10 times a day and count every single carbohydrate they're eating, I mean, we wouldn't want to, but I just wanted to get across in that article that, I'm doing it because I don't want to die, and if you have type 1, you would die very quickly if you don't do it. So I'm not doing it to be heroic or someone's warrior. I'm basically doing it because I don't have a choice.
Christine is also the American Diabetes Association's Director of State Government Affairs and Advocacy for a territory that covers 9 states. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. We're here to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by talking to athletes and artists, celebrities, leaders in our community, as well as the healthcare companies and tech folks that keep pushing things ahead, and those everyday people I talk about just living right with diabetes. My son was diagnosed 11 years ago, just before he turned 2. My husband has type 2, and I have a background in broadcasting, local radio, and television news, and that's how you get the podcast. We are back from spring break. I know a lot of people were traveling this past month, and I bring that up because my Community Connections guest, Christine, later in the show is going to talk about, I'd never heard this, people with type 1 or insulin-dependent diabetes. That's what she says we need to say. People with insulin-dependent diabetes can board the airplane first. I had not known that. So she's going to tell us a little bit more about that, the reasoning behind it, how to do it. But I reminded me that I wanted to share a story. Every pump company has their own guidelines, and every CGM, different endos will tell you different things for traveling, right, for going to the airport. And so we have been, over the years, we travel quite a bit. As I said, Benny has had diabetes for more than 11 years. We're very fortunate to get to travel. We travel, my parents up and down the East Coast, other relatives, and we travel internationally every once in a great while. And, we have our issues here and there. But there's protocol, right? You're supposed to ask for hand checks of certain things. You're supposed to not throw certain things on the conveyor belt. And the rule of thumb for us, and this is very general, I will link up more information. So this is some of that medical advice I don't like to give. But our rule of thumb is Benny can basically walk through the metal detector, but not the hands-up machine. So if you go through the hands-up machine where they do the centrifugal thing, I know that's not really what they're doing, around you, that's not good for diabetes gear. But most of it for us can go through the metal detector. And TSA is so inconsistent. Sometimes they scan him from his head to his shoelaces, and he's got to rub the hand thing, and he's got to do this and that. Sometimes they wave him on through. We have TSA Pre now for the last couple of years, and that has helped quite a bit. Usually he just walks through, and as long as he remembers to take his cell phone out, we are good to go. Some people have success with TSA Cares. That's not something we have used. But this trip, I noticed Benny and my daughter, they were in front of me. And, they know what they're doing. They know the drill. They went right ahead of me. And I noticed on the other side, Benny had taken everything off and chucked it in the thing that you're supposed to put your change and your cell phone, those little bowls, and put it through the x-ray machine. He put his receiver, he put his pump, he took his pump off and threw it in there. I mean, everything was in there. His cell phone, of course. And I said to him, "What are you doing? You're not supposed. He said, Mom, I do that all the time. I did not know this. I mean, he didn't do it all the time because I travel with him, and when he was younger, I did everything for him. But apparently he's been doing this with his old Animas pump, with his Dexcom receiver before he had Share. Now, of course, it's on his cell phone. But he's doing it with everything now. Is everything okay? Yes. Did we void the warranty? Don't call me Tandem. Don't call me Dexcom. I don't want to know. But yeah, so that was a lot of fun. So far, so good, but I can't say I recommend doing that. Oh, diabetes with a teenager. So fun. Okay, and speaking of which, and speaking of Dexcom, Diabetes Connections is brought to you in part by Dexcom. I remember in elementary school and preschool, Benny was not at all self-conscious about diabetes. He would show his friends how it was done and would check and dose right in the middle of class. He is in middle school now. He's in 7th grade, and he's really still comfortable with diabetes, and he doesn't hide it. But he never wants his type 1 to be the center of attention. The Dexcom helps so much with that. He just has to glance at his smart device to give him his reading. It's great. The Dexcom G5 is the first FDA-approved device to let you make treatment decisions without pricking your finger. For more information, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. My guest this week is an author and adventurer. KJ Howe is from Toronto in Canada, but she grew up all over the world. And for a long time, she worked as a medical health and fitness writer. But then she became involved with the International Thriller Writers as the executive director of Thriller Fest. This is their conference. It's held every July in New York City. Her breakout series, The Freedom Broker, focuses on elite kidnap negotiator Thea Paris, who happens to live with type 1 diabetes. KJ, Kimberly, Howe's grandfather, lived with type 1. We talk about why she chose that particular condition for her character. Now, I spoke to Howe 2 years ago when she released the first book in this series. I'll link that up in the show notes, along with information about Skyjack, the brand new book just released. Hey, it's great to talk to you again, and I'm excited to see where Thea goes next. Kimberly, thanks for joining me.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be back. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Oh, so much to talk about in addition to the new book. But let's start there. When we last left Thea Paris, she was, James Bonding it around living with type 1 and rescuing others from being kidnapped. But she has gotten herself in a difficult situation. Tell us where you picked up in Skyjack.
You bet. So Thea Paris, of course, is an elite kidnap negotiator, and she's also very involved with child soldiers in Africa. So she's taking two former child soldiers from Africa in Nairobi to London because they're going to be adopted by a new family. And while they're on the plane is hijacked, and therefore the adventure begins. And I won't give any spoilers, but it's a very exciting plane, and I dare anyone to read it while flying.
Oh, no. Well, you do your homework so well on these. I mean, this isn't just your making up or your imagination. You did so much research when we last talked. How do you get the ideas for these? I mean, you can't possibly be a nervous flyer.
No, I mean, I've flown all my life. My father was a private pilot, and he did aerobatics competitions, so I flew with him, and that certainly, helped me overcome my fear of flying. And I've been an avid traveler for many years, so also, I get used to just being in bush planes and everything. But I think the research is incredibly important because I believe very much in authenticity. As a former medical writer, research is a passion of mine. And also, I find it very interesting to meet new people. I feel like my life has truly changed since, immersing myself in the world of kidnap and ransom. I've met so many interesting people, former hostages, elite kidnap negotiators, special forces soldiers who rescue people. And so the ideas really come from meeting all these different folks and hearing their stories and basically trying to think, okay, what could happen next? There are very many types of kidnapping, as I think we talked about last time. And so I can explore different types of kidnappings in each book. And I can also explore different settings.
How do you then meet all of these people who have thrilling but nerve-wracking stories and continue to travel? I mean, to me, I would almost want to stay home under the covers.
Well, I think if you can travel pretty safely if you're astute and you take protective measures. And one of the things I love to do is travel safety talks, to try and help people become safer travelers. And also, the thing is that at the bottom line is there's certain countries that are very dicey, yes. But many parts of the world are relatively safe. And there's a map on my website. If you're curious, before you plan your next vacation, you might want to take a look at kjhowe.com. And you can see all the hot spots for kidnapping. So you know places like the Philippines, for example, Mexico, Middle East, they can be tricky. So just try and avoid those hot spots if you want to be as safe as possible.
Oh, that's great. We'll definitely link up to your website so people can learn more, not just about the book, but the information you have there, because it is more than the novels. But, the first book was so striking because there are so few protagonists that have any kind of chronic condition, let alone type 1 diabetes, and then where it doesn't become this pivotal, horrible plot point. And I loved, learning more about Thea because, sure, it came into play because she had to do things when she traveled. She had to figure out, she couldn't have her pump at one point, and she had to do injections. As she's taking these risks, she's also thinking about type 1. But I kept turning the page thinking, the whole book is going to come down to type 1, like the whole thing. And I was so glad it didn't. I know that might sound weird, but I was so glad that this was, quote, just a woman living with type 1 and still doing everything that she meant to do in the first place. Please tell me that happens again in the next book.
You bet. It certainly does, and it will continue to happen. I really wanted to, first of all, it was very important for me to write a character, who's vulnerable. She's such a strong character. I did not want to create a comic book type character, where she's invincible and takes on 6 bad guys and leaves them, on the floor. And as well, I think, personally, she has, a history because her brother was kidnapped in front of her when she was only 8 years old. So she has that vulnerability emotionally. And she also has the physical vulnerability of having type 1 diabetes and needing insulin. I felt like, there's a real need for people to understand that someone can be incredibly competent. We see Olympians, we see, actresses and movie stars with type 1 diabetes, and I really want to showcase that the fact that just because you have an illness, it does not define you, it is not who you are, and you're capable of great, incredible things, really. And that's what I wanted to blend it so that it's part of her in the sense that it's her essence, but it doesn't, dissuade her from tackling her dream, which is to save hostages.
What was the reception like to this book? I know that it did really well. People loved it as a thriller. But in terms of the diabetes community, did you hear from people who said they enjoyed it for that? I mean, I kind of feel like I'm being silly, but, maybe I'm the only person who doesn't want type 1 to be the main plot point. But that really resonated with me. I wonder if anybody else mentioned that to you.
Yes, several people did. Thank you for asking. I've heard from a lot of readers, who have people in their family with diabetes or have it themselves, and they were very, very pleased that it was important to the story, but not pivotal, like you said, in the sense that, she lives her life and diabetes is part of her life, but it's not, because I think it would get very old. This is going to be a series, right? And Thea Paris is going to travel all over the world and deal with hostage situations. And it would be like really eye-rolling if you constantly had her, having situations where it was like, needing insulin and not getting it. So what I would like to do instead is to explore the different facets of having diabetes, whether it's emotionally. I'm going to do probably a flashback when Thea found out at age 12, that she had diabetes, so that we can see what it was like for her to learn about the illness and how it impacted her life. I want to showcase, for example, the first time she dated and how that diabetes affected that. There's so many different things I would like to explore, but in different books and not doing overkill in one book. You know what I mean? Just sort of slowly exploring the different things and the different aspects of diabetes. So it's always present in the books, but not up front and center, like you said, taking over the book.
Wow. And we should be clear, you don't have type 1 yourself, but as you mentioned, you're a medical writer formerly, and your grandfather had type 1.
That's right. And
tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. First of all, I actually have an illness myself, and it's rare. So it was very important to me, to get that information out there and to have a character with this illness because, I've traveled the world and I do tons of things, and I've, struggled with some health issues. So that was, I think, it's very personal and close to my heart. But I wanted to do something, I chose diabetes because of my grandfather having it, and autoimmune runs in our family. And as well, I felt like, it's such an important illness out there in the sense that people, there's a lot of myths. And it's wonderful to be able to dispel those myths in the books and to get information out, and hopefully in an entertaining fashion, but also educational, right? And so that's why I chose to do it, and that's why I chose to have a protagonist that has some sort of illness and disability. Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you to share anything you don't want to, but I'm curious, why not write about your own autoimmune issue or your own illness? Why not get more personal? We'll hear KJ Howe's answer to that question in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is also brought to you by OneTouch. Handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The OneTouch Vario Flex Meter seamlessly syncs with the free OneTouch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the OneTouch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, as of this past October, OneTouch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the OneTouch Vario Flex Meter and OneTouch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneTouch logo. Now back to my interview with KJ Howe, where she's talking about why she chose not to write a character with her own health condition.
Yeah, well, I just think it's rare, so it's a bit unusual, right? I think diabetes definitely adds, like, it's a perfect situation in a sense for a thriller, because if Thea doesn't constantly have her insulin, right, that it's a ticking time bomb. There's different things. Whereas, I have, something to do with mast cells, and it's not nearly as provocative. So to keep things thrilling and the pages moving quickly, I definitely want to keep it to something, like that. And also it affects way more people too, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like that it has an impact as well, because I want people out there, with diabetes to know that anything is possible still. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
It's rare. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have nothing to hide about it at all. It's just more, I think, that it's more applicable to others.
I totally understand, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I have a big mouth. So I have ulcerative colitis, and as you're saying, writing a thriller, what kind of thriller would that be? It would be Stacey's in the bathroom again. I mean, or she forgot her medicine, so in a week or two she might have an issue. So it's a different type of story.
Yeah, so that's what I mean, right? It's like, there's certain illnesses that lend itself to fiction, I think, more than others. And in a sense, too, like I said, with the global epidemic, in a sense, with diabetes, I think it's a very important issue. I wrote about diabetes a great deal when I was a medical writer, so I'm very familiar with it and comfortable in that realm. And I'm also very lucky to have experts like the lovely Dr. Herschel Gerstein and others, advising me. And I also welcome anyone listening. If you have ideas about things I can explore with Thea Paris and diabetes, please write me on my website, because I really welcome all input, and I really want to do everything I can to help the community.
That's great. That's great. So, talking about thrillers, though, I mean, this is your area of expertise, not just writing them, but you are the executive director of Thriller Fest, which is an annual lineup. It's got everything from authors to wannabes to, workshops in New York City. And this year, my understanding is that you have, talk about blockbuster, you have George R.R. Martin, the writer of the Game of Thrones books, who's going to be there. How did that happen? That's wonderful. Congratulations.
I know. Thank you so much, Stacey. We're extremely excited about it. I mean, it's become a phenomena, and I absolutely love his books and the show. As you mentioned, you do too, and I mean, it just really, it's going to be a huge crowd. If anyone would like to come July 10th to 14th, we were very lucky to have a connection to George R.R. Martin through one of our contacts, and we really wanted to honor him with a Thriller Master Award. And what that is basically a Lifetime Achievement Award in the thriller genre. And when we say thriller, we don't necessarily mean thrillers. We mean thrilling writing,
Yeah.
So for example, we've had R.L. Stine of Goosebumps fame as one of our Thriller Masters as well. So basically any page-turning fiction. And George is going to be incredible. There'll be a spotlight interview with him. His editor at Bantam will be interviewing him, and you'll get to learn all this sort of neat little secrets behind his writing. And then he'll also be doing signings and panels.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was very fortunate to see him once at an event here in the Carolinas, and he is a wonderful speaker about his work. He's just he's engaged. He reads so well. It's so much fun to watch him. And he loves these meetups. I mean, I think he did them, from what little I know, I think he did them years ago before he was so super famous, and really liked it. And so, he still does it, which is fantastic. And I'm sure that's where he's going to announce the next book is going to be coming out, right? Can you tell us that?
I don't know, but I definitely, I hope soon, because I think there's a lot of people waiting.
Oh, yes, I am definitely one of them.
Fingers crossed, right?
Right.
We don't know, but yeah, it's going to be phenomenal to have them there. Anyone that's in the New York area, come on in for even a day pass and join us, because it'll be well worth it. George only does, I think, 1 or 2 events a year, so it's really a rare and special thing to meet him in person.
That's great. And, I'm looking at the website, and as I mentioned, it's got this pitch fest and workshops. Are these for aspiring writers as well?
You bet. It's a great place to come if you have a book or a manuscript you're working on. We have things like Craft Fest and Master Craft Fest, where you can study with really talented New York Times bestselling authors. The classes are unbelievable. Then we have Pitch Fest, where 60 agents come and they hear pitches from aspiring authors, so you can maybe sign your dream agent. We have a lot of success stories, and if you want to read about them, they're also on the website.
You probably get this question a lot, but can I ask you, what is your advice for aspiring writers? If someone's listening and says, I have a book idea, or I keep starting a book and I can't seem to finish it. What do you tell people who want to write?
Well, I think you need to be in it for the long haul, because it's extremely tough, industry. And you really got to keep at it and hone your craft. And the best thing you can do is to take local classes to start, really learn the craft of writing. For example, I mentioned earlier that I'm a medical writer. Well, writing technical stuff or business emails is a very, very different experience than crafting, a dramatic fiction book. So you really need to learn how to write, fiction and dramatize and create that vision for the reader to experience. And from there, I would also recommend people pick a topic they're incredibly passionate about, because most publishers love series. We all love series, right? Think of Game of Thrones, for example. And when I designed the Thea Paris series, I knew that I was really fascinated by the world of kidnapping, and I wanted to immerse myself, and I have been immersed in that for 5 years. And I keep meeting new people that teach me more. And so that's the kind of thing you should do, is be passionate about what you're writing, because that'll show through. It'll shine through in your writing, whereas I think if people just try to write to market, okay, vampires are really hot right now, I'll write a vampire. By the time you jump on that bandwagon, it's past. So write from your heart, I guess, is the best thing I can say. And also reach out and try and get people to help you, mentors, people in the field, maybe someone that's local, that's a good writer, and just keep chipping away and make sure you're in it for the long haul, because it is a long haul.
Yeah. How do you write? Are you a coffee shop person? Do you write on planes? Do you have a routine where you have to be home and wearing a particular sweater? What's your routine?
Well, I'm pretty flexible, actually. But generally, my favorite place to write is I have a really wonderful, comfortable sectional, and I love writing on my laptop. I like silence, because it allows me a clarity of thought. Some people love music, right? Yeah. Some people like music without lyrics, some people with lyrics. I can write in a coffee shop, but to be honest with you, I really prefer like a really serene environment where I can just lose myself in the book, in the world that I'm going into, instead of all the distractions and noise. But I've written in planes, everywhere, because you just sort of have to. I do travel a lot, so I try and make use of that time to write. I love writing in the mornings because I'm fresh. Yeah. And there's science that says when you first wake up, your subconscious is still kind of there, and it allows you to be a little more creative, whereas later in the day you tend to lose that. So the best thing to do, actually, is jump out of bed, start typing without even breakfast.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I do tend to peter out in terms of my work by about noon or 1 o'clock, but I've always credited that to my almost 15 years as a morning news person. So like my day used to start, I used to get up before 3 o'clock in the morning. Wow. So I think my body is still recovering from all of that.
I bet. That's early. I mean, I'm talking like 6 is early, but 3, wow.
Oh yeah, that's middle of
the night.
Ridiculous. I don't recommend that, to be honest with you. It was fun for a while, but I don't think that's a long-term situation for anybody. So back to Thea Paris and back to the story that you're telling here. You say this is a series. Is it too soon to ask if there will be another book?
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, I'm working on book 3 as we speak, and that plot line. So I met this fascinating gentleman, and he is a hostile environment consultant. So he guards journalists in war zones. And I've had the great, opportunity to speak to him at length. And I've learned, what it's like for reporters to be overseas and on, in war zones and other dicey spots. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a character kind of, loosely based on him that's, taking care of journalists in a war zone, and they're kidnapped. And this gentleman, it happens to be Thea's ex-boyfriend.
Nice.
And so it's going to be interesting to see what cooks up there. And she'll try and, of course, bring him back home, even if he was a bad boyfriend.
Oh, I love it. I was curious, you mentioned earlier your father's a pilot, the bush planes. Did you ever have a close call in any of that?
I've had a lot of close calls. I mean, not by purpose, of course. I'm extremely careful, but, I was an avid scuba diver, and I've been diving wrecks, and I've been surrounded by sharks before. If you're talking about planes specifically, there's been some planes that, you just kind of think, am I going to land safely here? I've experienced extreme turbulence, and I don't know if you've ever done that, but it's pretty intense. I mean, when the plane is literally shaking, you just wonder how is it going to stay up in the air. So lots of different adventures and close calls because, that's what happens when you travel to all these foreign countries.
Yeah, and you live in Canada, though. I mean, you guys are supposed to be, calm and, sedate.
I guess I defy the stereotype, right? I don't know. But you see, maybe what part of it is, my father worked in telecommunications. So I lived I'm from Canada, but I lived all over the world, Saudi Arabia, Africa, Puerto Rico, Austria, Switzerland, all over the place. And we kind of kept moving. So I think that's probably why I was drawn to writing an international thriller, because I feel like I am Canadian, and I'm very proud to be. I'm also a child of the world a little bit.
Yeah.
Having lived in different places.
That's great. Wow, how exciting. When you're writing a book, I don't even know if you can answer this question, but I'm always curious. Are you most satisfied when you just start or when you just finish?
Well, both, I would say. I get so excited when I start a book because the possibilities are endless, and I'm full of ideas, and it's popping everywhere. But you can imagine it takes a year to write a book. 400-plus pages, right? I write pretty large thrillers. And by the end, I'm just so happy to have kind of reached the end in the story that I'm just really excited to get done. And then editing is such a grueling process, and I spend a lot of time editing, months. I don't even want to say how many times I probably read the manuscript. And then, of course, my editor, tinkers and makes suggestions, and I make more edits. So I would say that both are equally exciting for different reasons. I hope that helps.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just curious because there is something about that blank piece of paper, that blank screen on your laptop where the possibilities could take you anywhere. But I imagine after a year of living with these words that you're ready for the next one.
It's sort of like being pregnant, right? You just want the baby out. It's 9 months, 10 months. You're like, let's get it out. Hey,
before I let you go, you're going to be on a book tour. Are you coming to the States?
I sure am. I'm actually coming to several different cities in the U.S., and it'll kick off on April 10th in New York and follow from there. And anyone that's interested, seeing if I'm coming to your town, feel free to go to my Facebook page or my website, and everything will be listed there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to read this next installment, and I hope I get to talk to you again soon.
Me too. I really enjoyed talking to you, and thanks for the great questions.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about KJ Howe and how you can buy Skyjack, which is being released at the same time this episode is coming out. How about that? Just go to diabetes-connections.com or check out the show notes. And again, the show notes are right there on whatever podcast app you are listening to right now. Sometimes you just have to click, more info or swipe whatever, all these different podcast apps. But if you're on Facebook or Twitter and listening, please go to the website, diabetes-connections.com, and all the information is there. I'm glad you're listening however you are. But if you want to make it really easy, just get the app. We have our own app, Diabetes Connections, for Android and for Apple. So that's the easiest way to make sure you never miss an episode, or subscribe on whatever podcast app you are listening to. Okay, so during that interview, I mentioned that George R.R. Martin is speaking at her Thriller Fest this summer, going on in July. And longtime listeners likely know that George R.R. Martin's series, A Song of Ice and Fire, that's what the Game of Thrones TV show is based on, is my favorite book series, and I'm crazy about it. I'm obsessed with it in a way. I'm going to share more about Martin. I met him. I'll share that story at the very end of the show because it has nothing to do with diabetes, but I really want to share it with you. And so I'll put it down there at the end of the show. And it's fun. Okay, now it is time for our Know Better segment. And today I want to tell you about a new initiative to find out more from women of color living with diabetes. Know Better Foods is our sponsor for the Know Better segment. They are grain, gluten, wheat, soy, dairy, peanut, yeast, and guilt-free. So what's in them? Well, they're made with amazing foods like chia, flax, coconuts, almonds, and egg whites. And I can tell you, I've been enjoying their product since the fall. My doctor recommended that I try a gluten-free way of eating. It has really helped a lot of my issues. And Know Better Foods has really helped me make that transition because I like bread. I like muffins. I like donuts. And they are delicious. I love the cinnamon cookies. I'm a big fan of their chocolate chip muffins. And my husband has cooked with the breadcrumbs. He's definitely the better cook in the family. And he says they are great, very easy to cook with. So check them out. You can always use the promo code Stacey10 to save and just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the No Foods logo to learn more. There is a new Instagram and Twitter account that I think is very much worthy of your attention. It is WOCDiabetes, Women of Color Living with Diabetes. And they describe the account as a visual collection of stories of women with color living with diabetes from around the world. This is a project from Cherise Shockley, if that name is familiar to you. She is also the person who started Diabetes Social Media Advocacy, DSMA, which is a hashtag I use on really just about every podcast episode. Thanks for that, Cherise. She created a community on Twitter, I want to say 7 years ago. That's a guess. But there has been a Twitter chat every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, all that time because of Cherise and her efforts. There's a lot of other people helping now, but it is a way to connect with people who have diabetes, type 1, type 2, whatever kind, on social media. And she saw the need for an additional account and additional stories, and that's what this is. Again, it is WOCDiabetes, Women of Color Diabetes, and I'll link it up in the show notes so you can check it out for yourself. But as usual, Cherise with great information and ideas leading the way, and now you know better. In my community connection this week, I read a lot of columns and interesting stuff about diabetes. I'm sure you do as well. And sometimes you just find something that just grabs you. And that happened with 2 articles I read by our guest. Christine Fallabel talks about not wanting to be somebody's hero in diabetes, and also what it's like to marry someone without type 1, the whole in sickness and in health thing. I didn't realize when I asked her to be on the show that she's also the American Diabetes Association's Director of State Government Affairs and Advocacy for a territory that covers 9 states out west. We spoke about that, what the ADA can do for you. They are a huge resource when it comes to protecting the rights of people with diabetes, and about that hero stuff. Here's Christine Fallabel. Christine, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, a lot of different things to talk about with you today. Let's start, with the basics. Your diagnosis story. You're 12 years old, and I read somewhere you had lost 30 pounds at the age of 12.
I'd lost 30 pounds, yeah. So I was diagnosed on June 20th, 2000. I was on a family vacation, worst family vacation ever in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I was always a very, active preteen, but within a month I had lost 30 pounds and my family thought it was the flu. I remember being just constantly thirsty. My vision was so blurry. I was so sick, I didn't even want to go on vacation, but my family finally convinced me. And for a preteen girl, it was bad when I had my mom pack for me because I didn't have the energy. So, that was pretty bad. And within 3 days of my vacation, rushed to the hospital, blood sugar of 668. And yeah, I lost 30 pounds very quickly. So I was very sick, but fortunately, no brain damage or anything like that.
So you mentioned having your mom pack for you as a preteen. I have a daughter who's now 16, so I totally get that because I haven't packed for her in years. And she's very particular, so I understand. I also remember that age is so horrible to begin with. You're trying makeup or maybe you're not, or you're having your ears pierced, or maybe you're not, and everything seems like it's the worst. What was it like to go to middle school? Do you remember when things really changed for you? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, do you remember thinking about that change in middle school?
I do remember, yeah. And of course, being, any kind of different in middle school is horrible. And especially, I left 6th grade as a quote unquote normal kid. And then I started 7th grade with a chronic disease. And so that was just a lot to face. I didn't want to tell anyone I had diabetes. I made my mom promise that she wouldn't tell any of my friends' parents and that sort of thing. I remember promising myself that I wouldn't go to any sleepovers because I didn't want to have to bring my insulin and check my blood sugar in front of people. I was like, I can just make it until I'm 18 and head off to college and then I'll handle it then. Yeah. That only lasted for about a year or two. And then when I started high school, I just decided that I would be, completely honest with who I was. And I found a group of friends that were very accepting, but it was really hard in the beginning for sure.
I hesitate to ask because my guess is there's no magic bullet here. But how did you get there? How did you go from 7th grade to wanting to hide it to high school to being okay with it?
Yeah, I think, one good thing that my mom really did was encourage me to go to diabetes camp right away. So I was diagnosed in June and I went to diabetes camp that same August. And just meeting other kids with type 1 really helped to normalize the situation. I realized that I'm not odd, it's not strange, there are other kids dealing with it. And then that kind of just turned my whole life around. So by the time I entered high school, I was meeting other kids in the nurse's office with type 1. They were checking before lunch. And it's kind of cute. My first boyfriend ever, I actually met him in the nurse's office because he had type 1 as well. And we used to go down together and, take insulin before lunch together.
You guys, so cute. That's great. It seems so easy, right? I'm going to just find somebody that gets it. But it's so hard to find those people sometimes.
It is, for sure. Yeah, even as an adult, it's still really hard. I found myself last month on a flight and I didn't want to take a shot in front of, the people sitting next to me on the plane. And then I'm like, I work for the American Diabetes Association. Like, I have to own this, And so it's a constant reminder just to really be your own advocate and stand up for yourself. And, there's nothing to be ashamed about.
So what brought you to the American Diabetes Association? How did you find that career? How did you decide this is something you wanted to do?
Yeah, so, having diabetes always made me more interested in health and wellness just because we have to be so in tune with our bodies. Even as like a 14-year-old, I quickly realized that eating a bowl of ice cream has more effect on my body than eating a bowl of broccoli, that sort of thing. And I got very involved in athletics and health and wellness, that sort of thing. And after college, I was working as a social worker in Philadelphia for a few years. And I had every intent of leaving that profession and going to law school. And then I was talking with my best friend one day and she's like, you really love, public health, health and wellness, that sort of thing. I think you should study Masters of Public Health instead of going to law school. It just seems like such a better fit. And this was back in 2009 when the degree was relatively just, becoming very popular. And so I researched it, I looked into it, and I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to, help other people live healthier lives, whether they have diabetes or hypertension or, any other kind of disease state. And, just kind of moved out to Colorado in 2013 and I worked for the state health department as their diabetes coordinator, passing state policies to benefit people with diabetes. And then I worked at Colorado Medicaid for a few years in a very similar role, their public health liaison, and eventually just found my way to the ADA, which combines, advocacy and government affairs, which is just the perfect fit for me. So I'm very lucky to be working in diabetes advocacy.
Wow. And you're the Director of State Government Affairs and Advocacy now.
I am, correct, yes.
What does that mean? What do you do?
Yeah, so I lead all the legislative and regulatory priorities for the Mountain State region. So I cover, I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and I cover Colorado, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Minnesota, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Nebraska. I don't think I forgot any states there. But we really just kind of guide, the laws and policies and make sure people with diabetes aren't being discriminated against in our states. People, have the same access to healthcare and jobs and education that someone without diabetes does. So we've come a long way since 1920, but we have a long way to go. People are still being discriminated against pretty regularly.
Well, can you share a little bit more about that? Because there's so much that the American Diabetes Association does in terms of that kind of advocacy that many people with type 1 do not realize. Mm-hmm. As a parent of a kid with type 1, I know that the Safe at School program has really helped us, and I refer people all the time because there's so much good information state to state about what the ADA offers to protect kids in schools and to safeguard their rights. What about adults with type 1? What should they be going to the website and looking up in terms of what the ADA offers adults?
For sure, yeah. So the ADA does offer help for everyone with diabetes through the whole lifespan. So we're the only organization that covers gestational diabetes, prediabetes, type 1, and type 2. And I think people don't realize that when they are thinking about what the ADA does. And so in today's political climate, we're really protecting kids and adults with their access to affordable and adequate health care. And so we're very cognizant and wary of cuts to Medicaid and further cuts to the Affordable Care Act, which offered so many protections for people with diabetes. We also rally for funding for the National Diabetes Prevention Program. Like you said, Safe at School. We have Safe at School laws in place in 33 states. And those protections are extended even when kids go away to college. So even when they aren't really kids anymore, they can have a 504 plan in place to make sure that their needs are met. And that also extends to kids taking the SAT when they're preparing for college. They can have a 504 plan in place, making sure that they can have their glucometer on them, low snacks. They're allowed to have a little extra time if they do go low or high. And then we also fight against health disparities and support legislation to make health equity more available for everyone. So sugar sweetened beverage taxes to get people to not drink as much soda, healthy school lunch programming, step therapy bills. So there's a lot of protections that we work on to help not only kids with diabetes, but adults as well.
It's funny because I think people who are diagnosed more recently, luckily, and I guess it still happens, but for the most part, there's a lot less on-the-job discrimination than there was 20 or even 30 years ago. But if someone does feel like they're being discriminated against because of their diabetes at work, what can they do? Should they call the ADA? So what do you do?
Yep. So we have staff attorneys that can definitely give people their rights right over the phone. And sometimes, we take things a bit further if they're being blatantly discriminated against. But we always suggest people call 1-800-DIABETES to report that discrimination. It goes into a national database, and we're able to track those cases and make sure those people get the help that they need.
Excellent. Do you spend any time in your capacity, as the Director of State Government Affairs and Advocacy, do you spend any time lobbying state legislators?
We do. Yes, we do. If there's a bill that we want to sponsor, so for instance, our Safe at School bills, we will lobby and work with local coalitions to get the support, whether that's the Department of Ed, State Health Department, and other state agencies to get those laws passed for sure.
There are a few state legislators that are working on insulin pricing. Is that the kind of thing? I mean, can the ADA get involved in that and lobby, for something like that?
Yeah, we can. And oftentimes we will work with the legislators and, make sure that these bills are very thorough and they cover all areas of the insulin supply chain. And we're always more than happy to provide fact sheets, information, state level data. So anything we can do to help educate legislators about, insulin pricing, type 1, type 2, we're definitely a community resource that people can reach out to.
Let's talk a little bit more about the American Diabetes Association a little bit later on, because I want to get back to your story. And when I read some of the things that you've put out online right now, one of the things that really stood out to me is a column you wrote about. It's called "Sometimes I Just Don't Want to Be Anyone's Hero." Mm-hmm. What is that all about? I mean, Do you really feel like, and I think maybe parents of type 1 kids, people like me, have a tendency to do that to adults with type 1?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you agreed on that very quickly. Tell me about what you meant in this column.
Sure. So, so many people come up to me and they're like, you're my hero. I don't know how you take a shot 10 times a day or prick your finger all the time. And usually I love that kind of compliment. I think it's great. We are working as a human pancreas, and that's amazing. In addition to everything else that we do as just regular humans. But sometimes it's not my choice, right? I mean, if anyone had a choice to take a shot 10 times a day and count every single carbohydrate they're eating, I mean, we wouldn't want to. But I just wanted to get across in that article that I'm doing it because I don't want to die. And if you have type 1, you would die very quickly if you don't do it. So I'm not doing it to be heroic or someone's warrior. I'm basically doing it because I don't have a choice.
Let me ask you, though, it may not be heroic, but can you give yourself some credit for the strength that you've shown? I mean, you have to do it, yes.
Yeah.
But you've done this for years, mostly without, big public complaining. I mean, can we give you some credit for it?
For sure. Absolutely. And it is nice to get that credit. And on the other hand, I feel like people with type 1 don't get enough credit. We're not, given free insulin, and we don't have to work only 20-hour weeks, and, we're not given any subsidies. I think the best thing I've ever gotten, because I have type 1 diabetes, is a free lifetime national parks pass. And so if you're listening and you want that, it's available for people with diabetes, and you're also able to board airplanes first. I think those are the only 2 breaks we've ever been cut. So yeah, definitely. I give people with diabetes a lot of credit, but sometimes I'm just, taking my pre-dinner bolus because I have to, and not because I want to show that I'm, stronger than someone else.
All right. But I have to stop you right there. Board the airplane first. I've heard that, but I've never really asked about it or found out the details. How do you do that?
Mm-hmm. So basically, when they make the announcement saying, if you have a disability and you need extra time, people with diabetes are qualified to head up then and say, I have insulin-dependent diabetes, and they let you board first. So, a little perk, but at least it's something.
All right. Now, devil's advocate here, because if you need it, take it, right? But why would you need the extra time? Is it you want to get settled and make sure you have room for your medical supplies or check your blood sugar? Or, what's the rationale there?
I think it is people want to check their blood sugar. Sometimes people, when they travel, they're running low all day. Sometimes they're running high. Sometimes for me, when I'm getting on a flight, my glucometer and my Omnipod are in a different pack than my purse that's going to sit at my feet. So I want to make sure I have enough time to get it out, unpack any low snacks that might be hidden in my carry-on, that sort of thing.
All right. I'm taking lots of notes because my son hasn't traveled solo yet. But he's pretty close. At age 13, I'm going to let him do that. And I want him, of course, when they take a minor, though, they just, have you ever done that, by the way? They take a minor, they take you on the plane first. My daughter has done it. And it is, have you done this as a minor? Do you remember?
No, I haven't.
It is mortifying. You have to wear a lanyard around your neck with, and it's not even a postcard size piece of paper. It's like almost a letter size, like an 8.5 by 11. It's this giant pamphlet. Oh, it's so funny. And it's like, unaccompanied minor. And she's 15, and they're like going through the airport, and then they do get on the plane first. So when the kids, if you have a kid with type 1 flying solo, they don't need to use this to board first. As we were just talking about, the unaccompanied minor stuff will get them on the plane first, but they may just pass out from embarrassment on the way there. Right. Oh my gosh. That's pretty funny. And so just one more thing, not to put too fine a point on it, you would say insulin-dependent diabetes, not I have type 1 diabetes when you're talking to the airline personnel?
I would say that, yes. Same thing for the National Parks Pass, insulin-dependent, just really drives it home that, you are dependent on a substance for life.
Something else that you wrote that I wanted to talk to you about was about being married to someone who doesn't have type 1. And this is a great column, and I'll link up these things we're talking about, of course, at diabetes-connections.com. This is a column about what in sickness and in health means with type 1 diabetes. This is for Insulination. Can you talk a little bit about why this was important to you? I mean, your husband doesn't have type 1, but he certainly knows a lot about it. Why did you want to write this?
Yeah, so I just got married last July, and so we're newlyweds, and we wanted to write our own vows. And so for about a year, I was drafting my vows. I love to write. I really wanted to make it creative. And in sickness and in health kept on coming up on all of the, online searches for Val recommendations. And it just got me thinking how amazing it is that someone married me. I've had chronic disease for 18 years. There's a lot of complications with diabetes if it's not managed correctly, and just how amazing that was. I mean, my husband's allergic to chocolate, and that was a little bit of an obstacle for me because I love dark chocolate. And just thinking about someone, vowing to love you through everything with a chronic disease is huge. There's just a lot of weight there. And I wanted to highlight how amazing that was, not only for my husband, but for all of the spouses in America that are supporting, someone with type 1 or type 2 diabetes. It's just a lot to handle. And diabetes is a very individualized disease. It's 99% self-management, but it does affect the whole family. He's the one waking up with me every night. If I go low, he's the one who helps me when my blood sugar is high, go into DKA, that sort of stuff. So I just really wanted to honor that.
What was his reaction? Does he think it's that big a deal?
He didn't think it was that big of a deal. And, it's just, he's always known me as a person with type 1. And so it was just kind of the package deal. But I think he definitely appreciated that I went so deep into it. So
yeah, it's really good. I would definitely recommend checking that out because I don't know. It struck a chord with me just because you really don't know what's going to come in a marriage. We're married 20 years this month, me and my husband. And it's, through sickness and in health, you never know what's going to happen. And when you marry someone who has a chronic condition, you are already agreeing to do a lot more. So it's a good one. Right. I'll definitely link that one up. So back to the American Diabetes Association, if I can ask you a couple more questions about that. What would you like to see them accomplish? In your role, what are some of your goals that, if you could wave a magic wand, you'd really like to see happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first and foremost, I want there to be a cure for diabetes. I just think every day that's what we're working towards. But I think in the meantime, we're really working towards advanced technology and supporting initiatives like better CGM coverage, better DSME coverage, that's diabetes self-management education. And I think every person with a diagnosis of diabetes should go through that education to really own their disease. Of course, we're looking for better diabetes prevention programming coverage, specifically around Medicaid, because people who are on Medicaid are the most vulnerable populations, and they have the least access to good healthcare and diabetes tech. So I think just leveling out the disparities in diabetes would be super, super helpful. Last month, the SDP Special Diabetes Program was reauthorized, and so that's an amazing win for people with diabetes. It funds crucial research for people with type 1 and Native American populations affected by diabetes. So just more federal funding for research, for a cure, for advanced technology. And then you mentioned Safe at School before. We have 33 states that meet the tenets for Safe at School, and that allows a school nurse to delegate insulin, glucagon, and it allows kids who are willing and able to self-manage. I'd like to see that number at 50. All 50 states have those freedoms for better diabetes care in schools. So those are some of my pie-in-the-sky goals.
And I should mention, too, I'll link this up as well. If you're not sure what your state law is for Safe at School, there is an amazing website by the Diabetes Association, the American Diabetes Association, and I'll link it up. You put your state in, and it brings up everything in your state. Mm-hmm. So, I'm in North Carolina, but I have a lot of friends in South Carolina, and the laws are different, and the guidelines are different, and it's real easy to toggle back and see all the different things. And you can also check out what's going on in other states. But if you have any question, or sometimes your school nurse or the staff at school has no idea, very easy to give them that link or print it out and say, see, I told you. And you can go from there. Although it's always much nicer. Instead of see, I told you, it's hey, and I try to do this all the time, and I usually fail. Hey, we're all in a team. Let's work together to make it great for our kids, because that's what we all want to do. Oh, well, it's so hard to do that. Not want to go and, screaming and yelling. We started way back talking about your experience at Diabetes Camp. And, the camp that my son goes to is an American Diabetes Association camp, as are many of them. What is it like for you, knowing how much it helped you, and now that you are really helping other kids have that opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I really want to go back to camp to volunteer as an adult, as a counselor. Nationwide, we have 50 camps in 24 states, and we host over 6,000 campers. So I just think that camp is one of the most important things that you can do, and send your kids to camp. And if you're a teenager listening, go to camp. It's amazing. But I would really also love to see more camps for adults. I think a lot of kids age out of the camp system, and then they go back and they volunteer as a counselor for a few years. But then you have all these people in their 20s and 30s that are super activated advocates, but they don't really have a place for that right now. So I would love to see an adult diabetes camp. I think that would be a dream come true for a lot of people.
Wow, I've seen a couple of programs throughout the year. I know Beyond Type 1 has one that they're just starting out this summer. And I want to say that there's, it's called like the boot camp in New Jersey for adults. And I'll look those up and link up more information on that. But that would be amazing. Although I have to tell you, I think that a lot of adults would like to go back to camp if they could have a camp in a hotel, right? Like Camp Marriott rather than camp in the woods. I went to camp my whole childhood, and I would much prefer to have Camp Marriott now.
Right. A warm shower is always nice.
I went to camp so long ago that the boys' showers were outside. Now, they were private, but they were out. I know. It wasn't that long ago. Oh, my gosh. Times change. Well, Christine, thank you so much for joining me and talking about all of these things back and forth on a lot of issues. Congratulations on your newlywed status. That is wonderful. I'm thrilled for you both. And
Thank
please,
you so much.
Yeah, and please come back on. Keep us posted about what's going on at the American Diabetes Association, and reach out anytime. Thanks for being with me.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Great to talk to Christine, and all because I saw some interesting stuff that she had written online. I will link up those two articles, as I said, at diabetes-connections.com and in the show notes. And if you come across something that you think is interesting, please let me know about it. You can always post in the Facebook group. That's really the best way to have other people comment on stuff. We've got a great community going there. It is Diabetes Connections to the group, or you can certainly email me or direct message me over any of the social media platforms. We are all over the place. All right, a while ago this episode, I mentioned that I was going to talk about George R.R. Martin. He is the author of the books that most people know really as HBO's Game of Thrones. The books are A Song of Ice and Fire. Yes, getting my nerd on right now. And I am, if you've listened to the show for a long time, you know that I'm kind of weird with the comic book stuff and the Game of Thrones stuff. So I wanted to share something with you about that. When KJ Howe mentioned that Martin was going to be at Thriller Fest this summer, it reminded me of when I got to meet him. All right, so back in 2014, he came to Charlotte for a con, right? You've heard of Comic-Con. Well, they have Carolina Con here every year. And I was working in media. I was at my longtime morning radio job when they announced it, and they put out the call for media submissions, media passes, that sort of thing. And it was really quiet. I mean, even back then, the show was out. I want to say this was in 2012 that they announced it. So the show was already out, and people were all excited about it, but nobody was really talking about the fact that he was coming to Charlotte. I think that the Carolina Con people had some marketing issues, but they found me. So I immediately submitted to be there. And then I spent 2 days at the conference. Now, okay, I love the books. I'm a Star Trek more than Star Wars. I'm an X-Men fan more than Avengers. I mean, we've been through this before. I always get embarrassed. I don't know why when I talk about this. Maybe because this all stems from when I was a teenager and now I'm a middle-aged mom driving a minivan. But it's still there, right? It's still fun. Once a fan, always a fan. And I don't go to cons, though. This is not my thing. I mean, I don't dress up. It's wonderful if you do that. But I really wanted to meet him and try to do an interview with George R.R. Martin. So 2014 rolls around. The books are even more of a phenomenon. The show is, doing incredible things. People are flipping out. By the time the con came here, the line to get his autograph and meet him was around the block. I mean, the word definitely got out. But there I was with my media pass. I'm like the only media person there. And I went to 2 events where he was speaking. So the first one was a Q&A that he did with fans. And you had to sign up with advance and you had to get tickets. And but there was a media row. So I got there and I'm the only media person there. You can't record anything, but I've got my pen out. And I slide into the second row, which is for media people. And I kid you not, the people around me, 4 of them, there's maybe 6 people there, 4 of them are in costume. So media, yeah, maybe, who knows? So we're sitting there and George R.R. Martin comes in. Everybody's like, oh, yeah, there he is. And he sits right in front of me. And people around me start trying to be very, sneaky and take selfies like, hey, there's the back of his head and that sort of thing. But I'm just sitting there and thinking like, wow, I didn't expect to even get this close. Do I tap him on the shoulder and talk to him? But then he turned around and he says, excuse me, I hope my hat isn't blocking your view, isn't going to block your view. I'm like, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to complain. So I said, no, it's fine. Thank you very much. That's very nice of you. Okay, so long story short, we just chatted for a quick second about the hat. And then after the Q&A, I was able to go up to him, ask him for an interview, declined. I'm sure I said something idiotic. I don't even remember. But I did thank him for writing the books because I enjoyed them so much. And I did ask his assistant for an interview, and she said, but when I say declined the interview, he said, yes, ask her. She said, no, we're not doing any local interviews. I did a Q&A. You can go ahead and read that. In fact, I will link it up. It's on my old blog that I used to write and still do from time to time. But I'll link it up in the show notes. It is one of the most visited pages in my entire blog. It has nothing to do with diabetes. It's a write-up of the Q&A that Martin did that day in 2014. And if you are a Game of Thrones, or really if you're a Song of Ice and Fire fan, I recommend you read it because it's awesome. It's a good write-up, but it's great. It really gives you insight into some of the things that he's thinking. And he talks about some of the things he's answered a bajillion times, but some things that I think are unique to that, including if you're really familiar and you know the Mercy chapter. That was actually my question for him at that time. Mercy chapter is in a unreleased chapter of his books that will be coming out. So if you're really a diehard fan, you'll enjoy that. One more quick thing. I connected with these books during a time where I needed something like this. I actually mentioned in this show, in the interview with KJ Howe, I have ulcerative colitis. I got very, very sick in the summer of 2012. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. It was very difficult. They didn't know what was going on, basically. And it was very touch and go for a while. I'm not trying to be dramatic. But I wound up homebound for more than 6 weeks. I'd already read all these books, and I went back and read them again. And it was such comfort to me at that time. Isn't that what happens a lot, right? You need something at some time and it becomes very special to you. And that's what happened here. And I also engaged in the A Song of Ice and Fire community. I told you I was a big nerd, but they really helped me out at a time where I needed something to concentrate on that wasn't my illness. So I will be forever thankful for that. We have our diabetes community, but there are more out there that can help. If you have listened thus far, thank you so much. I did not actually mean to go on that long about the George R.R. Martin thing. It means a lot to me. And I'll go as far as to say it made a difference in my recovery. I'm going to post about this in the Facebook group. Is there something that has done that for you? Is there a work of fiction? Is there a work of art? Is there something that has helped you, whether it's through diabetes or through your life? Is there a touchstone for you? As I really think these books have become for me. I can't think of them without thinking of that recovery time for me. So let's post that this week and we'll see how it goes. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Okay, I'll be talking about diabetes again. I'll be doing that in Orlando at the end of this month at a great summit that I'm going to for the Dancing for Diabetes folks. That conference is Touched by Type 1. And then in May, we have the great event with Writing on Insulin and JDRF here in the Charlotte area. In July, I'll be at Friends for Life. And then the summer just continues on. So lots to talk about. Please let me know if you'd like me to come speak at your event. Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. Thanks, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. And thanks to you as you listen. It is such an honor to do this show every week. I really appreciate you tuning in. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.